When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: Red Snow. User: RedNose25. Posted December 27th, 1996.
The year the carolers died started out quiet enough. My mother had strung lights across the porch, the old-fashioned big bulbs that ran too hot and hummed faintly when you stood close. The yard was powdered with fresh snow, untouched except for the rows of little deer tracks that zigzagged across the lawn. Inside, the heater knocked the same way it always did, and from the living room, you could see the soft glow of the nativity in the neighbor's window. It was the picture of peace, at least until the singing started.
We wish you a Merry Christmas.
I'd been sitting on the couch, half watching some rerun on TV, when my mother said, "Sounds like the Henderson Choir," and got up to check the front window. I followed her more out of boredom than interest. Carolers were part of the neighborhood ritual. A little awkward, a little corny, but harmless. The group assembled in our yard was bundled in heavy coats and scarves, holding candles cupped in their palms. There were maybe 10 of them. Adults elbowing teenagers into place the way groups always did. They looked cheerful enough, stamping their boots and shaking off the cold as they arranged themselves in a semicircle.
Good tidings we bring to you and your kin.
Their voices blended together in the first verse, clean and soft, floating through the frosted air with all the comfort of a warm blanket. For a moment, it felt like every Christmas card my grandmother ever mailed me. Crisp winter night, snow in the air, friends and neighbors singing for the joy of it. My mother nudged me, smiling. I barely remember smiling back. Something was off, and I felt it before I understood it. The deer tracks in the snow didn't look right anymore. They were deeper, wider, and there were more of them. Shapes that didn't match hooves, shapes I couldn't place at all. They crisscrossed behind the group, faint at first, then sharper as the moonlight hit them. While the singers swayed with the music, something else moved in the shadows just beyond them. I blinked, thinking it was a trick of the porch lights, but the shape didn't vanish. It just crouched low, as if waiting for the right moment to stand. The carolers didn't notice. They kept singing, drifting into the second verse, their breath rising in soft clouds. The taller shape behind them slowly uncoiled itself. A silhouette stretched too long and too thin to be human, and even then my brain tried to cram it into something normal. Somebody's coat hanging from a branch, maybe a neighbor cutting through yards, but the thing lifted its head, and in the dim glow of the candles, two pale reflections blinked back at us like glass eyes. My mother whispered something under her breath. I couldn't hear her over the singing, but I saw her step back from the window, hand pressed to her chest. I didn't move. I was stuck there, staring as the creature edged closer to the singers with slow, deliberate steps that left deep gouges in the snow. The first one to die was Mrs. Holloway. She'd leaned forward to start the next line when something yanked her backward so fast her candle flew out of her hand. The choir froze mid-note as she disappeared behind them, the snow kicking up in an explosion of white powder and thrashing limbs. Then came the sound, a wet, ripping noise that didn't belong anywhere near Christmas. Chaos broke instantly. The carolers screamed, candles falling and hissing into the snow. Someone slipped and was trampled by two kids sprinting toward the street. Another woman tried to run but didn't get far before the creature lunged from behind Mrs. Holloway's half-buried body. It struck her sideways, jaws clamping around her shoulder with a crunch I heard even through the glass. Blood sprayed across the untouched yard in a high arc, landing in bright spatters that steamed when they hit the snow. A man swung his heavy music book at the creature, hitting it across the face with a slap that didn't seem to bother it at all. The thing's head snapped toward him, those glassy eyes shining with something like intelligence, cold, perfect, unforgiving. And then it tore him open. My mother screamed. I grabbed her, but she was rooted in place, watching as the creature barreled through the remaining singers with horrifying speed. It moved like a wolf, but stood like a man, hunched and long-armed, its body coated in thick, dark fur that shook loose clumps of ice with every lunge. The smell of iron reached the door, sour and hot. Somebody pounded on our driveway, screaming for help, but nobody could have saved them. The street was empty. Every neighbor tucked inside, eating fudge or wrapping gifts, oblivious to the massacre happening in the yard. The choir scattered, but scattering only split them into easier targets. The creature snapped one man's neck so fast it barely slowed its run. Another woman slipped near the mailbox and tried to crawl away. She didn't make it 10 feet. The thing crushed her spine with a single blow, hunched over her like something feeding. Seconds passed like hours. Blood trails painted the snow in crooked red rivers. Candles flickered where they'd fallen, wax melting into the drifts. The singing had stopped, replaced by wet tearing and the gurgling cries of people who realized the night had turned on them. I dragged my mother away from the window, half carrying her into the hallway where she collapsed, shaking. I wanted to call someone, the police, the neighbors, anyone, but my legs wouldn't move at first. And when they finally did, I grabbed the phone on the wall, but my hand was trembling so badly, I misdialed it twice before giving up, the receiver dangling while the distant sound of carnage continued outside. It didn't last long. The creature finished its work quickly. The noise subsided, replaced by an awful, heavy silence. I don't know how long we waited before I climbed back to the window, knees shaking, heart pounding so hard I tasted copper. The yard was empty. No carolers, no bodies, no creature. Just torn snow, scattered candles, and the soft drift of falling flakes washing over the gouges in the ground. The only thing left was the color. Pools of bright, vivid red soaking through the white in wide, terrible circles. It looked almost beautiful, like Christmas had come early, and when the snow kept falling, soft and peaceful as ever, it covered everything in a thin, delicate layer until all that remained was a single haunting sight: red snow.
Subject, vacant row. User, Lambman29. Posted, July 10th, 1999.
I moved into the boarding house because it was cheap, ain't because it was nice. Nobody picked that place for curb appeal. The siding was an ugly, peeling green, the porch sagged toward the street, and the mailbox leaned like it had given up years ago. But the rent was low, and after getting laid off from the parts factory, low was exactly what I needed. The landlady, Mrs. Grover, was a small, sharp-eyed woman who seemed to operate off caffeine and suspicion. She handed me a brass key, warned me not to wander into the wrong rooms, and told me the vents might rattle during storms. I didn't think much of it. Old houses make noise, right? My room was upstairs, the end of the hall. A thin carpet, an old wooden dresser, narrow bed, a window that looked out over a dead magnolia tree. It was the kind of room meant to keep you from getting too comfortable, if you know what I mean. I unpacked my duffel bag, stacked a few books by the bed, and lay down listening to the creaks settle around me. For a moment, it almost felt peaceful. But then I heard it. A faint murmur drifting through the vent above the dresser. First, I figured it was just another tenant. Sound carries weird in old houses. Maybe someone had a TV on low, but as I listened closer, the details ain't fit. It wasn't the rise and fall of a show or a single voice. It was several, overlapping, like a group whispering in another room. The strange part was the pattern. No laughter, no coughs, no pauses, just a steady stream of hushed tones, as if the speakers never needed to breathe. I pressed my ear to the vent, trying to make out a word or phrase, but the moment I did, the whispering stopped. I waited a while, then shrugged it off and went to sleep. The next night, it came back. I just finished writing another hopeless job application when the murmurs started again. Same cadence, same low, secretive tone. Curious this time, I stepped out into the hallway and listened. Silence. Downstairs, I heard the kitchen radio playing some oldies station, but nothing like the whispers I heard in my room. I knocked gently on the door next to mine. No answer. I tried one across the hall. Still nothing. And that was when I noticed the unsettling detail. None of the vents in the hallway connected to mine. In fact, the hallway vents were sealed shut with coats of old paint. When I got back to my room, the whispering had picked up again, louder now, almost eager. It sounded like it was coming from right behind the grate. I sat on the bed and tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was airflow or pipes or maybe even mice, but deep down, I knew better. I'd heard pipes. I'd heard rats. This was something else. Something conversational. Something focused. By the end of the week, The whispers had developed a strange sense of timing. They never started while I was moving around the room, only when I sat still. Long enough to relax, long enough to let my guard down. Sometimes it was after midnight when the house outside my door had gone completely quiet. Other times it was early evening, just after supper, when the last bit of light was fading into the window. The voices would hum to life in unison, soft but unmistakably close. One night, curiosity got the best of me. I grabbed a screwdriver from the drawer, dragged a chair beneath the vent, and began prying at the screws. As soon as I touched the first one, the whispering cut off like somebody had thrown a switch. The sudden silence made my ears ring. I stopped, waited a full, long minute. Nothing. But I swear I felt a faint warmth radiating from the metal grate like breath on the other side. I backed off, left the grate alone. It was around then that the other tenants, they started avoiding me. Mrs. Grover, who normally hovered around the kitchen like a warden, she wouldn't make eye contact. The older man at the far end of the hall, who used to nod stiffly when we crossed paths, he shut his door before I even reached him. Someone began leaving passive-aggressive notes about keeping noise levels reasonable, though I didn't make any noise worth complaining about. The whispers continued night after night, though, and started to wonder if the house had singled me out somehow. Like a room choosing a tenant rather than the other way around. One evening, after a long walk meant to clear my head, I returned to find my door standing open. Nothing inside had been moved. My books still stacked, my jacket still draped on the chair, but the air was warm and thick, like too many people had just been talking in the room. The vent hum had already begun, faint and growling under its breath. I stepped inside slowly, closed the door behind me, and said out loud, "I know someone's in there." The whispering surged for half a beat, swelling into a flurry of movement like bodies shifting quickly in a crowded space. Then it cut off again, leaving my room so quiet I could hear my own pulse. I sat on the bed for a long time, waiting for it to return, but the silence held. Later that night, after I'd finally drifted to sleep, the whispers exploded back to life. Not faint this time, but loud, urgent, frantic. I shot upright, and the sound poured from the vent like a tide. Dozens of voices layered and overlapping, too fast to follow, but undeniably aware of me. They weren't murmuring anymore. They were reacting. I stood, grabbed my duffel, and didn't bother folding anything. I yanked open the door and hurried down the hall, the voices thinning as I left the room like they were straining to stay close. By the time I reached the stairs, the whispering had dwindled into a long, low hiss that trailed after me down the steps. Mrs. Grover was sitting in the living room, knitting in her usual stiff-backed chair. She didn't look surprised to see me fleeing with my bag in the middle of the night. She ain't even looked up fully. She just said, "Some tenants don't settle in. Best you move on." She knew. She'd always known. I left the house behind me without looking back, the windows lit with that dim yellow glow that made the place look half awake and listening. I slept in my car until morning, and by next afternoon, I'd signed a lease on a tiny room above a laundromat across town. Sometimes, even now, the catch a faint murmur through cheap vents or hear a whisper when ain't nobody around, and I tell myself it's nothing, just old plumbing and thin walls, the usual noises of this old building. But I know the truth. Some houses don't want tenants. Some houses want witnesses, and whatever was speaking through that damn vent didn't stop when I left. I guarantee. It just learned how to listen better.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.